Hi there, I'm Robert Dancik and I'm here at the Cool Tools studio in Wisconsin. And today I'm going to be showing you a kind of faux bone 101. That's just the beginning of it, kind of how to work with it, sawing it, preparing it a little bit, and starting to make some objects from it. So what I have here is a sheet of 1/4 inch thick faux bone. It comes in 4 different thicknesses, but I'll get into that a little bit later. And you can see that it has this skin, they call it, on top of it. It's very shiny and it looks like a piece of plastic. But once you start working with it, you can remove all of that skin and start working with it so that it actually starts looking a bit more like bone. That's how I came up with the name. It can actually look like lots of different things. It can look like antique ceramics and lots of other materials. So what I have here is a piece that I'm going to be making something similar to that right now. I'll be sawing that out and to show you just generally how to work with the faux bone and a couple of tools that are specific to working with the faux bone. So I've cut out this shape, which is a very archetypal shape. It looks like an axe or a mezzaluna for cooking and a lot of other things. But you go to all cultures and this shape occurs. That's why I selected it. It also has an inside curve, an outside curve, and some straight, to acquaint you with the different ways of working with the faux bone. This is the faux bone, just kind of plain. These little very fine lines, almost like cracks. I'll show you how to do that at the end. It's just done with an X-Acto knife or a scalpel. Here I have these spaces that I have sawn away, and I filled it with an epoxy putty that they sell here at Cool Tools, and I'll be showing you that. The next one is I have a sterling silver top instead of wire. And here I did kind of like they do in Tibet, where they actually drill into coral and things and set in some turquoise. So that's how that piece is put in there. I just drilled a hole and put the bead in. I heated up the faux bone, which you can do, and it becomes very pliable. So I stuck the bead in and it just is held in just by the pressure of the faux bone itself. Here I have some faux bone with a lot of those scratches. These parallel lines that you're seeing are from a special file that I have. And then these are rivets. They're not really holding anything at all. They're just for decoration. And I'm going to be showing you how to make marks in the surface using a knife and also using an electric etcher. Engraver rather, I'm sorry. It can also be sawn very easily. And I have special blades for the faux bone. And the nice thing is that the blades fit in a regular jeweler's saw, but unlike regular jeweler's saw blades, everything can break, but they are very unlikely to break. And I'll show you that when I begin the next segment about sawing the faux bone. So to start with, it comes in these 8 by 8 inch sheets, and it has this skin that I mentioned. What I'm going to do is just take a brown pad, and in just a few seconds, that skin comes right off. And I have this nice, rich, dull, flat white. I think you can probably see that. I hope that's showing up. And the reason I do that is that if I'm going to draw on here, if I draw on the skin, it just wipes right off with my fingers. And this way it actually will stick to the faux bone and it won't wipe away as I'm sawing this. And for this particular form, I don't usually measure. I'm not after accuracy or symmetry. I just kind of wing it and yeah. Pretty standard shape for me. Again, I'm not looking for symmetry or anything like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to saw this out. Now these are the blades that I was talking about. And just as a demo, if I were to do this with a normal jeweler saw blade, they would just snap. Cool Tools are going to be selling these blades, and I have them for faux bone, and I also have them for metal with the same durability. This is a faux bone blade. And the reason I have these is that you're going to see that it goes really fast. I'm doing this in real time rather than a cooking show demo where I begin to cut and then show you the finished piece. It's really important for you to see that this goes really quickly, so that if you're sawing along and it's taking you a half an hour, you're doing something wrong. It's just not going correctly. So to start my cut, I will eventually go vertical, but I want to start by tilting my saw both ways, up and over. And I'm just going to start with a quick up and down. I'm going to bring it back to vertical. and I'm going to cut this out. Now, normally I'm really pushing moderately hard, but I let the saw do the work. It's a big sheet, so it can be a little unwieldy. So what I do is I make my first cut, and here's where the durability of the blade really shows. I can back it out like that. Normally, as you know, if you've sawn, it would just snap the average blade. To try to start at an angle like this is a little bit more difficult. So what I do is I actually just start coming perpendicular, and once I get my saw going, I can turn very easily to make that cut. So what I'm doing is I'm making the first two cuts. That will yield a smaller piece that's really easy to hold for that third cut. And again, I'm doing this in real time to show you how quickly this goes. The faux bone, even though it's 1/4 of an inch thick, is really very easy to cut. And now it's just my last cut. Again, I'm going to start by tilting both ways, and I'll start going up. And I put my finger behind it to hold it down. If I don't do that, I get that flop. So I'll put my finger behind the saw. I can't get cut because there are no teeth back there. And I should mention that as you're sawing, filing, sanding, and all of it, faux bone is completely non-toxic in virtually every single way. It doesn't outgas, it doesn't, there are no fumes or anything like that. If you smell something, it's really just the friction of the warming of this and the coating of the surface. You might smell something, but it's completely non-toxic. It's been tested by 3 labs and 5 universities. And all of the numbers for it on the MSDS and every other kind of test is 0. So you don't have to wear a mask, you don't have to do anything. It will not hurt you in any way, shape, or form. And you can also use virtually any tool that you have. It can't corrupt any tools because it's completely inert. So you don't have to have a special set of files, a special set of sanders, anything like that. Any tool that you have in your toolbox now will be applicable to use on the faux bone. Next segment I'm going to do is about starting to round over and shape the faux bone piece. So what I have now is I've cut this out. Don't worry about the marks of the ink on here. They'll go away when you start forming this. I have a really great tool here. I call it a faux bone forming tool. It's also called a deburring tool. And this is for dressing down the edges, and I'm going to round over the entire side with this tool. The trick about using this tool is that it rides along the edge of the faux bone. So if there's a bump or a gully in the faux bone, this will follow that bump or gully and make it worse, actually. So what I have to do first is I have to look at the silhouette. And that's what I'll do. I'll actually look at the silhouette to see if there are any bumps or gullies. And that side's actually pretty good. There's a little bit of a bump right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my file. Now, in jewelry work, we use really nice files in there, different grades and everything like that. For faux bone, it's not necessary. This is a really cheap wood file right out of a store that we all go to, and it costs about $2. And I use these constantly with the faux bone. And it's nice and big, it's really easy to handle, and it's very effective. So what I'm going to do is, no air filing by the way, right? No air filing. I'm just going to slide this in here. To file, this is a cross and this is an X. And to file properly, you want to make an X between the file and the work that you're on. This is for all filing. And what I'm going to do is start at the tip of the file and the tip of my faux bone piece, and I'm going to slide the file along and along the length of the faux bone piece and the length of the file. And you can see, I think you can probably see some of these little saw marks here. And the moment that all of those saw marks go away, I know that I have a continuous, smooth curve. And there I am. And I can do this, and then I'll just get the other side, the other end I should say, and all of those marks are gone. So now when I look at the silhouette, I have a really nice, smooth, even curve. Now I can take up my deburring tool, and I'm going to hold it in my right hand. If you're left-handed, you're going to do the opposite. You're going to hold it in your left hand and push away from yourself. Right-handed people pull toward yourself. When you look at the blade, it's kind of asymmetrically ground, so it actually has a direction that it has to go in. And what I'm going to do is, I'm not pressing hard on this, I'm just going to let the tool do the work. I'm having my hand against my bench pin to make it nice and solid, and I'm just going to pull this off, and I get these lovely little curlicues of faux bone. And what you're going to see is that I can actually round over that entire edge in about 5 or 6 sweeps of my tool. So this is already radius. That's a complete radius on that edge already. So what I can do now is, to get this end, I just turn it around, kind of like I did with a file, and pull toward myself. This tool, one of the tricks of the tool is that it is for inside curves and straight, but it's not really for outside curves. That asymmetry of the ground blade sort of catches. So I have a different way of doing this outside curve, or this convex curve. A concave curve, the tool works perfectly. So I'm going to do the other side now. And you'll see that the entire side of the piece, in a matter of seconds here, is completely rounded over. And you can look at the end, and it's completely rounded. So there's no filing or anything you have to do on these surfaces whatsoever. If I want to get rid of these kind of cleave marks, these flat sides, I can do that with sandpaper or a file, and I'll get into that a little bit later. A lot of times I actually leave these because when I start finishing the piece, those cleave marks actually pick up the light in a very interesting way. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you about taking down this edge. And what I do sometimes, if I want to have sort of a knife edge like that and it's centered, I actually draw a line down the middle of the piece like this. So when I start filing or sanding this down, I can get down to that line and I know that I'm midway, and it will come out symmetrical on both sides. I can also do things like I can make that kind of crenellated and go like that. I can do lots of things with that edge. I can also heat the whole piece and curve it ever so slightly. That's a little bit later on. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you to use a little barrel sander to take down this edge. But before I do that, if you don't have a barrel sander or any way of doing that, I can actually just take my file and start filing this off. Again, no air filing. So it goes down very, very quickly and easily. And I would just continue filing until I got down to that line. So I'm just going to set up my barrel sander here, and I'll show you how to take that down in a matter of seconds with the barrel sander. Okay, so I've set my barrel sander up on my flex shaft here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to crank it all the way up, and I'll try to talk over it. So I'm going to crank it all the way up, and I'm going to come along with my barrel sander, and again you can see in a matter of seconds that just takes it right down. And I'm down to that halfway mark. And I can start flattening this out a little bit if I want to, or leave it completely rounded. When I get to this end, I want to reverse it and go back the other way. And now I'm taking down that flat part. I'm going to turn it over because I can also do things like I can take my barrel sander and make all sorts of decorations. I can actually draw on the surface with the barrel sander if I wanted to. Now I had mentioned about this is completely inert and safe, so that dust that is being created, if you're a little sensitive to dust in general, you might want to wear a mask or something, but you don't need a special mask. No fumes are going to be harmful. So I've already got that down. Now what I can do is I can leave those marks if I want to. Something about finishing. Finishing doesn't mean smooth and shiny. That's one type of surface or finish. However, I can leave all of these tool marks if I want to. If you look at a lot of Native American work, the file marks are actually part of the aesthetic of the piece. So start thinking of not necessarily making it smooth and shiny, but leave some of the tool marks. It's evidence of the maker's hand, as they say. But I will show you, so you've got those marks now, but to get rid of those marks, if you do want to go all the way to a polished, shiny surface, I'm going to do that. And I'm just going to do part of it here rather than the whole thing, just for time's sake. So to get rid of those little bit of bumps and things that I caused with the sander, I'm just going to go over it with a file. And I can do little circles with the file too, and I don't get those lines that you normally get when filing. It removes all of those lines. And so again, in real time, I've only spent probably 2 or 3 minutes on this whole thing so far. And I've gotten rid of all of those marks. You can see the difference here, and it's actually getting just a little bit shinier because I'm starting to expose the actual surface of the material. That ink line, again, that's going to get all sanded off, so you don't have to worry. You don't have to erase those or anything when you begin. So my next part that I'm going to do right here is taking it from this kind of surface right through to a polished surface like some of these pieces here. So the next step here is, after I've got this file down, and again, I'm just going to be doing this one corner just for time's sake. Next thing I'm going to do is take to the wet dry sandpaper. Again, they sell this here at Cool Tools, and I'm going to be using 240, 400, and 600. Like I said before, smooth and shiny is not the proper finish, it's just one finish. So every step along the way could be where I stop. When I use the wet and dry sandpaper, you really want to keep the sandpaper wet. I have a little, in my own studio, I just have a Tupperware container. I just have the top on it. I just leave it in there all the time. It doesn't disintegrate or get weaker or anything like that. And you want to soak it for a little bit before you use it. So this is the 220 sandpaper. And the 220 is going to take away any tool marks that might be left. Now I'm not going to sand the flat part because that's already perfectly smooth. I'm just going to wait for the 600 paper, the finest grade, to take down that surface. But I'm just using it on the tool marks where I've used the sander, the file, and the deburring tool. So I've got that down pretty well. And I've erased all of the tool marks here. And I'll go ahead and do the side where I had used the deburring tool. And I'll get rid of all of those little cleave marks that I had mentioned before. And again, I'm doing this in real time so you can see that you're not going to be sanding this forever and ever and ever. It just doesn't work that way. It's really a fast material to work with. So I've already got all of those down. And now you can see that it actually looks like it's getting whiter. And it actually is, because what the sanding process does is it gets down, the surface has kind of like peaks and valleys. And the light comes in, and actually this is the surface of the faux bone, but these little tiny peaks, we're talking about very, very small, cast a shadow down here, and it makes it seem a little bit darker. And you'll see this gets whiter and whiter as I go along. As I get rid of all of those peaks and get down to the surface, I have full reflection. Okay, but that could be, that right there could be the way I leave it. It's a nice flat matte white. And I do that often on certain pieces. But to get through the polishing process, I'm going to skip over to 400. And I'm going to take the 400. And at the 400 level, the grit, 400 grit, I actually start getting just a little bit of a shine on the faux bone. Just like filing, I'm not air sanding here. I'm actually leaning on my bench pin to have a nice solid base to push against. And, you know, it's probably, I don't know, 45 seconds, maybe a little less, and I'm done with the 400. And I wish you could feel it, because it just gets smoother and smoother. When I teach this, I pass this around and people say, oh, it's so soft. It's not really soft, but it is smooth, okay? So again, I could leave this surface. That could be the finish of the surface. But to go a little bit further, I'll take my 600 paper and I will sand it down. And then now I'm going to take the sandpaper, the 600, and do the flat surface here to get rid of the rest of that skin and to give it all a very consistent surface so it kind of reflects consistently. But if you think about it, I might want to take parts of it and leave that with tool marks, take parts of it, leave it with a 400 sandpaper, and then other parts of the same piece polish up with a 600 paper. to have kind of a variegated surface. Now, I've done the 600, and the next thing I'm going to tell you is worth the price of admission, if you don't know it already. An interesting thing you can do is you actually take the 600 paper and you turn it over on its back. I know it sounds weird. You can laugh at me if you'd like, but it really does work. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to kind of burnish this now with the back of the 600 paper. It has to be the 600, none of the other ones work. And if you ask why, I'm just going to tell you it's magic. But it does work. And this will work, by the way, this polishing with the various grades of sandpaper up to 600, then turning the 600 over, will work on virtually any kind of material at all. This is how I polish most of my jewelry. I don't own a polishing machine. So you can see that it's already starting to shine and reflect. What I do next is I usually rub it on my palm for just a little bit, and then I rub it on my jeans. Levi's work the best. And now I've got a really shiny surface. And that's how all of these have been done. The next segment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you about getting some of this color and putting some of the scratches and lines and etching in here. Also drilling some holes like this. Again, any drill that you have will work on the faux bone. You don't have to get anything special. All tools that you have already will work. And that'll be the next segment. Okay, so now what I'm going to be demoing is to make some of these marks. And you can make marks with a really lot of different things. And I would encourage you to just experiment a little bit with anything you have around your studio or your shop. So I'm going to start with this rotary engraver here. And I'm going to just, I can make lines. I can make them graded. I can also do dots. I can do dashes. I can make all sorts of lines. And what these little crumbs, you just go over it with your fingernail and you just scratch them right off and they come right off. You can't see too well what you have done because it's white on white, but those will all show up the moment that I inject any kind of coloring. And as far as the coloring is concerned, I'm going to be showing you some shoe polish, but in these lines you can go over it with acrylic paint, watercolor, oil paint, waxes, virtually any kind of pigment, crayons, colored pencils. Prismacolor pencils are the best because they're very waxy, and you can just scribble right over it and it will come out perfectly, and then you just wipe it off and it will be just inlaid in the lines. So these lines that I'm doing here are done with an engraver like this, and the lines like this, these little craze marks that you get from old ceramics or old ivory, those are actually done with an X-Acto blade or a scalpel blade. And again, you're not going to be able to see them because it's white on white. And I use the sharp edge of the knife, and I'm just going to kind of drag the knife over a little bit like this. You can't see anything, but those will come out, and they're very, very, very fine lines. I can also take the knife and scratch it this way, turn it over and use the other side, and I can make all sorts of lines if I want to. I can also take one of my very favorite tools in the whole world. It's called a checkering file, and you can get them here at Cool Tools. And the difference between this and a regular file is that these are all actually little pyramids that are in a row, straight line this way and this way. So this is not a tool for forming or filing down or smoothing. It actually just makes marks like these parallel lines on this piece here. So that's what I can use this for, and I'm just going to take and go over this a little bit. You can sort of see them, and I'll go some lines this way. If I want to make a checkerboard, I can go 90 degrees from that and go back and forth, using my fingernail to get those off. So again, I can do all of these different things. If you have stamps, you can stamp into it. You can do just about anything, again, in your studio will make marks on here, as long as you scratch it. The faux bone doesn't really absorb much color. The only thing that it will absorb, and I'll show you this in a different segment, is alcohol ink. And the alcohol inks work perfectly on the faux bone. For everything else, you need to scratch and inject the color into those lines. So I have some old shoe polish here. And it's really old and it's crunkly and kind of dried out, and that's exactly what I want. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to take it off the big chunks or fresh shoe polish. I'm actually just going to scrumble around on the bottom here where it's kind of dried to the metal. And my brush is going to pick up just a little bit, and the moment that I start going over it, all of those marks start showing up. It's kind of magical. And I can leave a little bit of the shoe polish on the surface. And you can see those very, very fine lines that I was talking about. And the parallel lines of the checkering file. This is the back of the knife, all of these marks. And the thicker marks are the engraver. And here is where I did not sand. Remember I talked about leaving the sanding drum marks. And those are really nice marks. They're just different. And there's a little bit of up here where I had left those cleave marks from the deburring tool. And you'll see when I polish that off a little bit, they can actually see those planes. I hope that's showing up on the camera. And what I'll do is normally just take and wipe this off a little bit with a cloth or a paper towel, and you'll see that the brown has kind of stained the surface a little bit where I had been sanding and smoothed it off. And that will stay, and it won't transfer to clothing. If this is a pendant and you're wearing it, it won't transfer to clothing or anything like that. And that's what gives it that really shiny surface. I can also do things like drilling holes into it. So I've got a little drill on my flex shaft here. And let me get some scrap here and I'll drill down into that. What I can do is, again, no special drills or special tools. And I can actually just drill right down into the faux bone. I want to go slowly and pull it up. And this faux bone, because it's sensitive to the heat and friction, will actually expand a little as I'm going through. So to get an accurate hole, I actually just go through again to clear out any little compression that had happened after I withdrew the drill. That happens to be just about the right size for one of the rivets that they sell here at Cool Tools. I can leave it with the head showing, or if I want just a little dot, what I can do is I can take that and I can cut that off and hammer it down like a regular rivet head and yield something like that. It also allows me now to start attaching. If I wanted to have pieces of metal, pieces of glass, pieces of anything, I can just drill a hole in whatever it is that I'd like to attach to here and rivet it right into place. Much like I did with these. Here's a good example of that. This piece of sterling silver, this cap here, is riveted right through to the back, and the faux bone is basically indestructible. So even if I take a hammer on the faux bone and whack it really hard on a piece of metal, it doesn't even scratch. It's kind of fabulous that way because I can use any old tool to kind of smooth it down. It goes very quickly, but it's wildly, wildly strong. So I can hammer against it. I can do anything I want as far as, having rivets or any kind of other concussion that I would have on here. I can do that. The one thing I can't do is take a hammer and texture it because, as you just saw, it doesn't do anything at all. So I had mentioned about using Prismacolor pencils. I have one here, an orange one, and I've just started to inlay it into some of the lines. And as I mentioned, I just kind of scribble over it like that, and it goes right into those little lines. I just wipe it off, and there it is. I'd like to make it more complicated for you, but that's really simple. So I can do this with any kind of color I want. I just put it on, wipe it off with my finger. It just stays in lines. It gets sloughs right off of the surface, and it is inlaid there, and that's permanent. That will never come out. So Prismacolors are just wonderful pencils. You can use them on lots of different materials, but on the faux bone, they work flawlessly. So I hope you've enjoyed this Faux Bone 101. We're going to have several other segments about different ways of using the faux bone. And again, it can be married with the work that you're already doing or just do fresh work starting out with the faux bone. Thanks for joining us, and I will be seeing you soon. Bye for now.
Visit our Learning Center at cooltools.us for more cool jewelry making videos. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and be sure to sign up for our email list to be the first to hear about new videos, new products, and other cool stuff from Cool Tools.